Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we have our usual roundup of stories affecting the Sikh community around the world. And as the protests in Chandigarh wrap up, the students and indeed people of Punjab celebrate their victory over RSS pressure to saffronise their historic university. In the United States, the trucking industry is reporting a catastrophic loss of Sikh drivers in the lead up to Christmas. We report on the impact, not just on the livelihoods of thousands of Sikhs being lost, but also the huge impact on the US's supply chain. Are shelves going to be left empty for Christmas? Well, all that and more on today's show, but joining me, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
With a crooked, weird tie this morning. I don't know what happened there, but I'm doing well, Angus, and I hope you are as well as our viewers, of course. We are going through all of these amazing comments that you guys are sharing with us. Some of them just quick greetings, and other ones well thought out and articulated compliments or comments on different stories we've brought to you. So again, thank you for your participation in the show. We value that very much, and we appreciate you taking the time to interact with us. Don't forget, folks, we are getting closer to going live. So again, we're going to be going live with the hard launch in the new year in January, but we are going to do some practice live shows prior to that. And we'll try to let you know the day before, so this way when we do go live, you can join us if the time, because of the time difference, it may not work for everybody, but we'll see how it goes from there. So with that in mind, make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and share with your friends and family. Back to you, Angus.
Indeed. In the meantime, James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And as usual, we'll take a look at loads of great comments at the end of the show, so do stay tuned for that. Right, James, what are you going to start us off with this morning?
We have started out with a bit of a story that we've covered at great lengths over the last year or so, and we spoke about the other night. And I had mentioned last night that I had an audio clip from 2017 of an interview that was done through the United Nations. And I just wanted to air that because it shows how things, no matter, as they say, no matter how much they change, some things remain the same. And unfortunately, that is the situation when it comes to sexual assaults and rapes of women in India, that they are still viewed more as property than they are of valued equals. And that, of course, is very concerning. Now, at the latest count here, when we look at the woman count from the UN Women, and you can see here that the gender gap index and that is there. But when we look at the actual physical and sexual intimate partner violence, this does not account for stranger numbers. And they didn't have those stranger attack numbers on this particular chart that I wanted to show you. But I really thought it was important to look at the 29.3% lifetime physical and sexual intimate partner violence. So pretty much you're almost at 1 in 3 women who have experienced either sexual assault or physical assaults at the hand of their intimate partner. That is a staggering number that needs to come down. But when you calculate in the other sources of stranger attacks on women when it comes to sexual assaults, that number climbs up close to 50%. And that is alarming. That is something that we need to really look at and try to figure out, not only for India to solve this problem and to change the whole mental mindset there, but also how the international governance can step forward and say, okay, India, if we're trading, if we are increasing our GDP sales, trade back and forth, then there has to be real tangible solutions brought in and measures to hold people accountable. Now, we've seen in the past, and we've reported on this, that only approximately 25% of males in India that are charged with sexual assault on whether it is their intimate partner or a stranger on stranger attack or otherwise, you are looking at less than 25% of a conviction rate when it comes to sexual assaults in India. And that, again, is a systemic failure of the system to not only prosecute, but also to protect the women and the witnesses to such attacks. acts, because this is a real problem, is that the intimidation of witnesses and physical violence against witnesses is a major, major problem, as is corruption. When people are accused and charged with these type of acts, if they have friends or family that are in politics or government, there is a high level of interference within the judicial system of these particular cases, especially when it is law enforcement. Law enforcement does not take this as serious as they should. A lot of times they are blaming the victims. There have even been instances where victims have gone to police stations and been re-victimized, physically re-victimized in the police station. And this is, again, alarming when you look at these are the people that are supposed to be protecting the community's most vulnerable individuals, especially after such horrific attacks. But instead, they re-victimize them. They blame them. They shame them. They try to convince them not to press charges, not to follow through, or to speak of it again. And that is a part of the systemic failure to protect women and girls in India. Now, as we look at this, I'm going to play. Trisha Shetty had done this interview, as I said, in February of 2017. And I wanted to play it, although there's no video to it, but because it really shows how things are still remaining the same and the problems have not been challenged and dealt with by the India law enforcement, the judiciary, or the government itself.
We see this victim blaming happening all the time. In fact, recently there was a mass molestation episode that happened in Bangalore on New Year's Eve. And we had the Home Minister come out and say, well, this is what happens when the young people are influenced by Western culture. We had someone come on record, a politician come on record and say women are like sugar cubes. If it's a broken piece of sugar cube, sure enough, you'll attract ants. We still see this constant peddling of narrative that if a woman dressed better, if she covered herself up more, if she wasn't out on the streets, you can avoid being sexually abused. There's this obsession with wanting to know just what she did before the act of abuse that may have warranted her being abused. And so that extremely is a very bothersome narrative. And then people wonder, why is underreporting a problem? Of course it's a problem. If a woman is at a temple, she feels afraid to speak up. Why would she feel the confidence to speak up at a music festival? Hence we reach out to festivals directly and ensure that we put out messaging out there that there's zero tolerance for any kind of misbehavior against women, and that should something happen, they will take cognizance of it.
What are the biggest challenges she says faces?
So for us, our biggest battle is a couple of things. One is trying to fight culture and tradition that's so deeply rooted, where it's normalized. The kind of discrimination that women face, the kind of abuse that women face has been normalized over years. So trying to break that and say, you know what, it's not okay. This is pure discrimination on grounds of gender alone has been a huge battle for us. And also using the guise of religion to discriminate against women is something that's not okay, and that's something that we're facing a lot of opposition for. The second battle most definitely is trying to bring sexual education, a comprehensive sexual education in schools and colleges, because we come back to consent and we come back to our minister saying that criminalization of marital rape cannot happen in India because women don't understand consent. And we need to have sex education in schools and colleges because it all starts with conversation. We need heightened bystander intervention. But all of that can come into play only if you educate young people on what is appropriate behavior, what is inappropriate behavior, how can they take action. Because I tell you, every single time I visit a school and college, every single time my team visits a school and college, at the end of our 45-minute session, we have on an average at least 5 young people come up to us and share stories of being sexually abused as children. And that is just not okay. So it is a pandemic that does not get reported.
What role do the youth have in confronting these challenges?
Every time we have adults come up to us and ask for help, should they be sexually abused, it's more often than not to say, look, this happened, I need retribution, I want justice, which is completely fair. But every time I have young people come up to me and want to report it, it comes from a different place. It comes from a place of saying, for so long I kept quiet because my parents or my family members or my friends told me to. But now I realize that the perpetrator is in contact with other kids and could be abusing other kids. So I want to speak up now, not just to correct a wrong that happened to me, but for the sake of other children. So I come back to young people having not been jaded, having an uncompromised moral compass, and they don't indulge in gray area that much. They can see right for wrong, they can see black and white, and they have an unapologetic voice. As adults, since I'm getting into that territory sooner than later, I have to be very conscious to make sure that I don't stifle the voices of young people, because they know, and they face hunger more acutely than we do. They face discrimination. We call them vulnerable, and that is so true. They are disproportionately affected. They are marginalized. Their voices are not accounted for as much. So just giving them access on social media is not enough. Recognizing that we need to invest in capacity building of young people, because guess what? Every time you see revolution, every time you see street protests, it's young people leading the fight. It's them making sure that they fight on behalf of all of us, in spite of the disproportionate atrocities that they face. They still put on the suit of armor and lace up, as I say, and fight. And they do it because they have a personal stake in the game. So not involving young people, to me, seems like the most ridiculous conversation ever. Preaching at them instead of engaging them in conversation, bringing them into dialogue and investing in capacity building and skill building is what I think will address gender inequality and therein lead to equality.
So as you can see, it was a short interview that she had conducted, and I thank the United Nations Women for sharing that audio with me and sharing it with the media worldwide, because it's an important issue that needs to be dealt with. When you look at what she was saying, and there are politicians who are blaming Western culture, that the young bodies are absorbing Western culture, and that's contributing to the rates. And yet they have a much higher rate than any Western nation. So that there dispels that misinformation. Instead of taking responsibility and trying to find ways to curb this behavior, they are instead looking for excuses. When politicians say that a woman is like a sugar cube, that once they are broken, they attract ants. Well, they're saying that, almost that these women are attracting these scumbags who are attacking them or violating them. And again, how wrong is that to start blaming the victims and trying to push that blame back on them and to shame them? And then they say that women don't understand the rules of consent, and therefore they can be put into forced marriage because they don't understand what consent means. I mean, what kind of speak is this from politicians, that they just insult and degrade the female population of their country at this level? Completely disgusting, completely uncalled for, and you can see why I thought this was important to replay this interview, even though it was done in 2017, because it shows that a lot has not changed and how far they still have to come to give women equality in India, and how important it is that the international community not forget what's going on. So as we continue on, we are going to move to another story, and this one here is about the food banks in crisis in Canada and the United States. And we're not going to watch the whole video, but the whole video will be available on our Substack page, and we've put a bunch of recent articles up there as well that you've been waiting for. So let's take a quick peek at this and look at the challenges that are facing the food banks, but also the food insecurity that's facing North America at this time. Sorry, folks, we seem to not have the audio there. Okay, well, we seem to have lost the audio on this file, but that's okay, because I can talk anyway, and it's a longer video, so we'll make sure that you get the full format on our website. But in the meantime, folks, essentially right now, you're looking at a 9% increase in 2025 over 2024 for the Surrey Food Bank alone. It's when you look at the numbers across Canada, you're looking at about a 16% rise in the use of food banks. Each year, children are more and more impacted by food insecurity, and it is estimated that over 700,000 visits were for children as well as seniors and others in need across Canada in this past year. That's almost 750,000 people of families. Now, this does not take into account the small church or the Gurdwara or other smaller food banks. This is just from the registered main food banks across the nation. Surrey Food Bank hands out approximately 1.6 to 1.8 million pounds of food per year. And at this time of year, we know that they are pressing forward with their Christmas campaigns. What a lot of people don't realize is that if you don't have the funds to help to donate to the food bank directly, they also are in need of volunteers to help sort the foods. They have to go through every item that is donated to double check, make sure it's not damaged, make sure it hasn't been opened, make sure it's not tampered with, make sure the expiration dates are good. All of these things take a lot of people, whether that's their staff and their volunteers or just others that step in for a day to help out. And that's where you can come in as well. It's not always about the money. It's not always about the box of diapers or the can of baby formula. Sometimes it's just about rolling up your sleeves and jumping in to help. This is, again, a very important time of year because this doesn't just last the food bank throughout the holiday season to make sure that families have that special meal on Christmas Day, but it also goes on because the majority of the donations that are received at this time of year have to also carry them through January and February when they are traditionally very slow in terms of the donation stream coming in. So that impacts the communities, it impacts those in need, and food instability is getting worse. More and more people of two-income homes are actually utilizing the food bank as well. And this is concerning when even two parents working full-time are not bringing in enough. A part of that, of course, has to do with the inflation. A part of that has to do with the housing costs that are astronomical now in comparison to the percentage of income to household payments such as rent or mortgage. Those are huge factors. As I mentioned about inflation, this year alone, Canadians are expected to have spent up to $800 more annually on the food budget. Unfortunately, when it comes to the food budget, though, for most homes, when they are struggling already to make the mortgage payment, to keep the lights on, to keep the house warm, they find that the food budget is what we refer to as elastic. There is a bit of movement in that budget, but sometimes that means parents go without eating so they can ensure their children have a meal. And sometimes that means that the whole family skips a meal. And it's not right in the wealth that we have in North America, in Canada, in the US, that families go hungry, that children go hungry, that there's not food in the cupboard for them when they wake up or when they go to bed hungry and can't sleep because of that. It is a sad day when we look at the fact that we have enough food and capability, and yet we're not making it so that it's accessible to those who are most vulnerable in our communities. I also included in the whole video, you'll see trucks from Carry Movers, and again, that's a family company, but I just want to bring that up because it shows that every year Carry Movers, along with their staff, volunteer for the week to go around the city, pick up tens of thousands of pounds of donations from schools, from businesses, from churches and other locations that are collection points for the Surrey Food Bank. And I'm using them as an example. And again, it's about rolling up your sleeves and jumping in to help. It doesn't necessarily have to be a financial contribution if you don't have that, but you do have time available, then that can also be a huge, huge benefit. And that's where community coming together really helps to bring the food banks the supplies and the ability to do the work that they do. Now, there's always been a stigma for those who are utilizing food banks, and that is that they feel like they have failed. They feel like people are judging them. They feel like, there's just so much more to it in an emotional stand than just walking over the threshold of a food bank. It's all the emotional and psychological implications that come with that. And that's where things have changed. The Surrey Food Bank and many across North America have changed to a format that is more welcoming, less judgmental, not so much here's a basket of food or a hamper. Instead, they set them up so that this way, if there are cultural or dietary or special needs when it comes to what people eat, then they can pick out different things and almost like a shopping trip. And therefore, it helps to instill a bit of dignity and shows that regardless as to where you come from, if you are a new Canadian or you've been here for generations, you are all valued and you're important to the community. And that's why people support food banks, is to make sure that everybody feels welcome and to try and fill as many bellies as possible. We know that some people food banks, and what happens is that the longer families wait to utilize the services when they're needed, then when they do finally get out there and ask for help, then they generally need more extensive assistance because they've let this kind of build up a bit. So again, it could be health issues that are from malnutrition or not eating properly, not getting the right vitamins and nutrients, different things to that level. They may have been taking away from, the hydro to get an extra meal or, the gas bill or water bill. And then they fall behind on those and they're facing disconnection. So again, it is a tough time of year, and then it carries on through January, February. And companies such as Kerry Movers, GFS, the Surrey School Board, so many people are out there working hard, but it's coming up short, and the food banks are in a desperate situation. There are food banks in Canada and the US that are turning away people because they just don't have enough food in the warehouses or on the shelves. There are the early cutoffs for the Christmas hampers that usually go out because they aren't able to accommodate as many hampers that they used to be able to and that are needed this year. Across Canada and the US, it is a huge jump in the needs of the use of food banks. And together, I want to encourage everyone that you can do several things to help. You can donate financially online, just search your community and find your local food bank. You can give of your time, just like the teams at Kerry Movers and other companies are doing, and give your time to volunteer, whether it's going around the community to pick up from the donation locations or in the warehouse just helping to sort and check expiration. Huge help to those who are trying to get this food processed in time to hand it out for Christmas. And you can also raise awareness, as we are doing on this program, to encourage people to support your food bank, whether it's at your local Gurdwara or in the community with the registered food banks. Don't forget that if you donate $10 to a food bank, that money goes much further than you shopping at the grocery store because they get special preferred rates and less than wholesale a lot of times. So that $10 is almost like giving them 30. So that really helps. But you can also donate and get a tax deductible receipt in most provinces and most states. And therefore, if they are a registered charitable organization, you get a tax benefit as well. And at the same time, helping others in need. So again, I encourage you to do that. Just quickly before we go back to Angus here, we are looking at this story here. I will bring it to you tomorrow night because we are kind of over on those stories already. But we know that we spoke of a Sikh woman who was in her 70s and sent back to India from the US. And now the government of India has officially filed a complaint with their equals in Washington as well as at the embassy in India to put them on notice that they are really outraged at the treatment of this elderly lady as she was sent back at that time. And in closing, we did speak about a certain news agency and Bob Rye last night, talking about a lawsuit for defamation and slanderous comments they made in a story about the mayor of Edmonton. I did double check. That case is still ongoing. There has been no resolution, and I'll bring you more details on that story next week. Angus, back to you.
Yes, indeed, and just on the food bank story. I mean, well done to everybody involved in that. It's a huge charitable effort which has such a huge impact on so many people who are suffering under really high levels of inflation. And interestingly, this story is reflected right across many Western countries, and indeed, I was reading about New Zealand. People saying, "Oh, well, we're going to here in Europe saying, oh, we need to flee. Where can we go? Let's go to New Zealand." And all the comments on social media was from people in New Zealand saying, "No, don't come here. It's even worse. We're being priced out of our cities. You know, we're professionals and we can't even afford to live in our cities because inflation's so high, the cost of living so high, etc., etc." And it's shocking to hear that people on two incomes still are having to visit food banks. And really, it's just a warning to those who run the world, who rule the world, is that you mustn't forget the old adage that society is only 2 meals away from revolution. In other words, if people are not eating, if people miss out on 2 meals in a row, you're fomenting revolution. That's how revolutions start. So as a society, and particularly those running our society, better wake up, because when people start going hungry, they have less to lose, and they are quite happy to take to the streets and start marching with their pitchforks. So that's, again, a very salutary lesson to those who rule the world. Talking about those who rule the world, India, this whole story about sexual assaults, we sadly have to visit this story all too regularly. And those statistics that you've shown up there, James, are actually pretty shocking, I have to say. We do know that India is a very patriarchal society. It is a misogynistic society. And those two big words basically wrap up in 2 words. The fact that India is a nation run by men for men, in simple terms. And women are seen as second-class or even third-class citizens. And God help you, if you happen to be a Dalit, a lower caste woman, basically you are the lowest of the low. And so it's not surprising that we see these high levels of sexual assault right across the board. As I say, it's not even exclusive to the lower caste women, as we reported last year. That poor doctor who was raped and murdered. So it's endemic in Indian society, and Indian men, as a generalisation, do treat women appallingly. It is also, I find it very interesting that, and we did report this actually last year, the Indian legal system went through a huge revamp, a slight reshaping of some of the fundamental structures of the Indian legal system, the statutes, etc. And there was a huge opportunity there to change one specific law that there was a huge campaign to change. That was the law of marital rape. Now, in India, it is still legal to rape your wife. I mean, again, I just find that astonishing to even say that statement. But this was there's a lot of controversy. And there's a huge campaign still in India trying to change this rule. But essentially, in India, and this is something they inherited from the British. It was a British colonial law, and again, this is going back to 1947. But under the British colonial law, it was still legal to rape your wife. Now, India has had the opportunity since 1947 to change that law. And again, the major opportunity was last year when they restructured the law. And again, the campaign was launched, relaunched, I would say, to change that law to make marital rape illegal. It was thrown out. And in fact, there have been various cases, and I think even last year there was a huge case that I think went all the way up to the Supreme Court level, again trying to change this law. It was thrown out, and the reason was it is seen as too harsh, they said, on men. I mean, again, that statement speaks volumes again, because they say that the law of marriage in India has a whole host of legislation around it, and they're claiming the defenders of this ability to rape your wife are saying, look, there's enough law in place to stop it happening. Well, clearly there isn't, and it's interesting fact. I mean, for example, most countries on this planet, I think there's over 100 countries in this world, have signed up legislation that unambiguously labels marital rape as a criminal act. There are only 36, I think, countries in the world that still allow marital rape. Interestingly, some of the most high-profile ones of those include Afghanistan, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. Note there's a common theme there. They are Islamic countries, and again, I unapologetically often lay blame on the Islamic world and the Islamic culture, where again women are seen, in my opinion, as second-class citizens. Now, it's ironic that the Indian right wing are always blaming Islam for the world's ills, and that they're always, you even need not even social media, even the mainstream, they're always having a go at the Muslim world. And yet, India is actually practicing something as equally bad, in fact, arguably worse, is this is the marital rape law, is that you are allowed to rape your wife. And again, so when we see these statistics that 29%, nearly 1 in 3 women are raped or at least report a sexual assault by their intimate partner, their husband, boyfriend or whatever, those are the ones that were reported. You think of all the ones that aren't reported because the women who are raped saying, well, there's no point reporting it because it's not criminal. There's nothing wrong according to the Indian law. So in my opinion, again, it's just, there's this issue. And I talk about misogyny and the patriarchy of India. It's interesting in that recorded interview that there's reference. This is to an argument that actually we had quite a long time ago here in the UK. I think it was a judge or somebody in court actually said it was victim blaming. They said, look, if you didn't walk around wearing a short skirt or a low cut top, you wouldn't get raped, would you? And again, this is a totally misogynistic point of view, where it's men blaming the women for men raping women. It's your fault that I raped you because you were wearing a short skirt or a low-cut top. I mean, that argument holds absolutely no water, either legally or morally. And yet, this is the argument that is being thrown up in India, saying if you start dressing like Western women with prostitute-like clothes, it's your fault. Well, actually, let me throw this back at the people who argue that. Well, which country has the worst rape crime? It's not the West. Yes, we do have a rape problem, but India has an endemic rape problem. So in other words, it's nothing to do with our culture. It's your culture that's the problem. So in other words, that argument in itself holds absolutely no water. So again, this is why India is at the moment is trying to vie as a superpower. It might one day become a superpower, but it's going to become a superpower that is based on immoral principles. It is a superpower that treats its women as second or third class citizens. It is a superpower that allows men to rape their wives and with absolutely no consequence. This is a serious problem. This does not reflect a country that wants to have a seat at the top table in the world. Unfortunately, it's founded on really old-fashioned moral principles. And I say old-fashioned because, of course, the British Empire brought this law in that marital rape was legal, but Britain, the United Kingdom, I have to say, even to its shame, it took until 1991 before it finally became illegal to rape your wife. But ultimately, we got there in the end, finally, thank heavens. But India actually has reviewed this and perpetually, every time it revisits this subject, it keeps endorsing the fact that a man is legally allowed to rape his wife. I mean, what does that say, James?
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right that, we are still young nations when it comes to outlawing that. And that is disgusting as to how long it was allowed to happen. And as you stated as well, Angus, that the India government has had since 1947 after partition to say, hey, we need to make changes. And let's be clear, when we look at this is another argument for the women of Punjab to have Khalistan, because when it's ruled by Sikh, that is a major step forward in giving women equal rights, in giving them a position of equality where their bodies, their minds, and their opinions are valued just as equally. And therefore, that would help to not only educate the males within Punjab, but I think within that whole region, not even just in India or Pakistan, but I think that the whole Asian Pacific, in terms of, hey, this is what women contribute. They are valued in our society, and they should be treated as such. And I think that would go a long way to lead by example.
Exactly that, James. I think that is the answer, is that once Khalistan is established, it will set a perfect example to that whole region. This is how you treat women. Because let's not forget, in the Sikh Empire was centuries, literally centuries ahead of its time in terms of its treatment of women. Under Sikh principles, women are treated as equals on every level and in every aspect. And that was even before the British Empire actually treated its women as equals. The women only got the vote, I think it was the early part of the 20th century. So again, the Sikh Empire was centuries ahead of even the wonderful great British Empire. So yes, absolutely, I think Khalistan will set that example, and it is likely, once Khalistan is established, that the women of India will look enviously across the border into Khalistan and think, Yeah, I think maybe we should be moving there because at least they treat us properly and they treat us with dignity and respect that we deserve as women. So anyway, there you go. Let's move on now. And talking about Punjab and Khalistan, Punjab University. I'm delighted to say, yes, of course, we had that wonderful news that the Punjab University Bachao Morcha, which is this protest, did conclude last week after demonstrators declared a victory, a wonderful victory. And one lead figure quoted as saying, "Modi has bowed down in front of Punjabis for the second time within the last 5 years," of course, referring to the agricultural riots or protests in which Narendra Modi had to do a complete, quite embarrassing U-turn from his perspective. Now, of course, a video that went viral is one of many, actually. This is one of many. This is after the protest. Again, full credit to the young Sikhs here who are seen clearing up after the protest, setting a fabulous example. And again, it's a shame of Western protesters who, if you ever see a protest here in the West, the devastation, it's like a bomb's gone off after a protest leave. They never bother. So, I mean, well done to these Sikh students. Again, it sets such a great example, and it just sends such a clear message, not just to India and the Punjab, but to the rest of the world. This is how we live our lives as Sikhs, and this is what Khalistan, of course, will be based upon the same basic fundamental principles. Anyway, so back to the main sort of victory that was won here. Now, the announcement of the demanded Senate elections, it all comes back to these Senate elections which were cancelled. The finally on the 27th of November, the month-long movement was ended, and once again it showed India this might, as they call it, this might of Punjabi resistance in the face of subjugation, which again is a great statement that came out from the protest movement. And the election dates have been announced, and they've finally put an end to a central government's attempt to remove democratic student-led governance of the institution. And of course, it's a bigger story than that. It's not just about students. It was all about, it was a pushback against RSS control of the Punjab. Now, the protest itself, it was largely Sikh-led, and but it did actually also include many non-Sikh leading figures. And this, again, I think was why the central government actually caved in on this, because they realised this had the potential to go big. This really had the potential. I always talk about catalytic events. This had the potential to be that catalytic event to grow into something much bigger. And as I said at the time, it could even lead to the whole Khalistan movement actually daring to raise its head above the parapet and take to the streets. And again, I always look at Eastern Europe, revolutions that happened in the 20th century, the fall of the Berlin Wall, etc. Those sorts of movements started, like this. And so the largely, as I said, the largely Sikh-led protest began with Ardas and Langar, of course. It was seen as a vital tool to ensure that the protests remained active over weeks. And again, it was this whole fundamental principle of Sikhi that actually underpinned this protest and kept it going, because these things tend to peter out. Certainly in the West, quite often they peter out after just a few days. But these guys just kept going. The Langar was there. The Ardas kept them kept the moral backbone up there. It really lifted the spirits and kept this thing going, which is, again, why they won. And the protesters actually were universally praised, not just in India, but actually globally. They have been praised for this mass clean-up operation after this, because again, it was a month-long demonstration. And as one reporter said on the protest, as a quote from one reporter, he said, "This student protest raised significant questions about the university's Punjabi identity, Punjab's claim over Chandigarh," and that was a key part of this whole protest, is to try and reclaim Chandigarh as the capital of Punjab, and much more. But essentially, the idea of a democratic space for students and which speaks to the students held the heart of the movement. And just a week into what seems a bit of a new era for Punjab University, a ruling also saw the end of colonial ceremonial gowns as mandatory wear for formal student events, now allowing traditional Punjabi wear for men and women. So again, that was just a slight side issue, but again, it just shows this complete capitulation of the RSS-led Indian government to the demands of the Punjabi students. And again, it very much, I think, demonstrates, sort of reading between the lines, just how scared the Indian RSS BJP government were of this whole protest. They realised the potential that this protest actually had. It had huge potential. As I say, it could have been that catalytic event. And I think, again, when people say, the Khalistan movement is just a fringe movement, actually, clearly it's not, because this is yet more evidence. And again, the farmers' protests in 2021 and then 2 years later, they were indicative of this same sort of idea. that clearly the Indian government are terrified of the Punjab. They realise that the Khalistan movement is a lot bigger than they will admit publicly. They realise, as per the elections of Amritpal Singh and the other pro-Khalistani MP in the last elections last summer, they realise the Khalistan movement is a heck of a lot bigger than they are prepared to admit. And that is why, in situations like this, they capitulated, because they just know it just takes a single spark to get to that threshold point where people will say, you know what, I don't care anymore, I am going to take to the streets, I am going to campaign for Khalistan. That's the threshold point that they are terrified. And again, refer back to the story recently where they even admitted in court, the government advocate in court, when Amritpal Singh, again trying to secure his release, or at least even temporary release to speak in the Lok Sabha, the Indian state advocate admitted that any speech by Amritpal Singh has the potential, in his words, to light the fires in the five rivers. In other words, Amritpal has enough supporters across Punjab that it could literally, one speech could ignite them to take to the streets, and the whole Khalistan movement, that's it. That is the big event which will then lead to the establishment of Khalistan and the fall of Indian power over the Punjab. That's what they're terrified of. And this protest, again, is just another little sign. It's all the smoke that points to that single fire, the fire of Khalistan. So anyway, delighted to say that the official document did come through. Here it is, and which does confirm, I am directed to convey that the Honourable Vice President of India and Chancellor Punjab University has approved the schedule of Senate elections as proposed in the aforementioned letter. So, and it says at the bottom, the process is seen as another major victory against the saffronisation of Punjab. I think it's bigger than that. I think it's not just the victory over the saffronisation of Punjab, which of course it is. It actually is indicative the Indian government are terrified. They realise, as I've said, that the Khalistan movement is a lot bigger than they will publicly admit. They know that we are literally, potentially on the verge of Khalistan because the people are behind it. They know the people are behind it. They are trying everything they can, both domestically in India and, of course, across the diaspora, to try and bury it, to try and quell it, to try and squash it. But they know they are fighting a losing battle, James.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show the power of, going back to almost Bob Marley, the power of the people, as they say, that, when you come together, then you can make change. And this is a clear example where over decades and even generations, the whole atmosphere when it comes to protests and standing up for your rights is something the government does not like. They do not allow it. They crack down on dissidents. They crack down on protesters. They crack down on anyone who is reporting anything negative. And this goes to show that it is a time that is changing. As we hit this crossroads with society, that the youth are the movement that can help to make the change. And this is a clear example that they are succeeding at it, Angus.
Yeah, so well done and full power to all the students in Punjab and all those who supported that Punjab University in Chandigarh protest, because again it's very, very indicative of what is going on the ground. And as I say, it's very clear that in the Indian state, the RSS are losing this battle or losing this war.
That's right.
Right, let's move on to my second story. And I referred in the introduction. There's a bit of a crisis going on over in the United States. Actually, it's not just I was going to say California. It's not just California. It's across the United States, but specifically in California. This article in the LA Times yesterday or a couple of days ago. This actually, their reporters have done a lot of research and work, because there's a new crisis appearing, and it's the law of unintended consequences. This clampdown after these awful accidents that have happened, and particularly that one specific accident where an illegal immigrant, a Sikh, unfortunately, he was involved in a terrible, tragic accident when he tried to U-turn his truck across a freeway, and I think a family of three were killed when they piled into it. As a result of that, there's been a huge blowback. Of course, there's been a legal blowback. There's been the politicians are on it, social media right across it. The right wing have jumped on this, saying, "Oh, it's all these illegal immigrants, etc., etc." So it's had this huge blow up of unintended consequences in all sorts of directions. It's like a bomb that's gone off, metaphorically speaking, both legally, socially, etc. And its fragments, its shrapnel has damaged so many different aspects of society. And the LA Times has reported they've actually interviewed a lot of the trucking companies, of course, are Sikh companies. And it says, for example, I'll cherry pick some bits of this article just to sort of highlight the issues that are coming up. For example, like this Christmas, of course, it's supposed to be the busiest time of year. And they interviewed the Roadies Trucking Company. But as they say, dozens of its trucks are sitting idle. Why? Because, well, it says, an unlikely casualty of a surprise scrutiny of labourers from India. Yes, talking about unintended consequences. This company has 200 big rigs, big trucks, but no drivers, after authorities cancel thousands of CDLs, these commercial driver's licenses, in California, forcing more than 20 roadies drivers out of business and spooking others into quitting. Now, these trucking companies, and this is just one of many that had a very similar situation, they are offering all sorts of incentives to try and attract drivers. They can't get drivers. They're doubling the pay. They're offering to double the pay. They can't recruit enough drivers. Indian truckers say that it's not surprising. We're being targeted after that specific horrific accident. We're being targeted by not just people in the general public, but even in law enforcement, etc. Because we are under extra scrutiny of migrant drivers or being migrants and suffering tighter regulations. Now, of course, many of these drivers have fled the Punjab because of the persecution of the Indian state against Sikhs in the Punjab. So they've moved to the US, set up a new life, as they typically are, very entrepreneurial. Many of them have invested large amounts of money to buy these huge trucks. So there's one example here. This guy spent $80,000 to buy his truck, but now he's too afraid to drive it. Now, it says Punjabi Sikh truck drivers have emerged as the backbone of the American trucking industry for many decades. Of course, many of them have sought asylum in the US after fleeing the Punjab. And the facts and figures are quite astounding. We've covered this before. 750,000 Punjabi Sikhs in the United States. Of those, 150,000 work in the trucking industry. It's huge. I mean, it's so disproportionately, pro-Sikh, the trucking industry. So it's no wonder then we are talking about unintended consequences. You start clamping down on Sikhs in the trucking industry, it's going to have a massive impact overall on the US supply chain. Now, of course, unsurprisingly, as a result of, I talk about the unintended consequences, Punjabi Sikh the Sikh truck drivers report many instances of racism and racial profiling of the community. With Indian truck drivers, and it says Indian truck drivers, by that, of course, is the LA Times, so they haven't specifically named Sikhs here, but they say Indian truck drivers, but by Indian truck drivers, obviously referring to Sikhs. Sikh truckers reporting incidents of doors getting slammed in their faces, racial slurs being used at truck stops. Of course, this rise of right-wing hate crimes. Feeling a sense of not belonging in a place where you've worked, earned, contributed, and where your children have grown up is convincing drivers to leave the industry, one person said. Now, it's actually a part of this, and again, looking sort of behind the scenes, is that there's a bit of a sort of war going on legislatively between state level and federal level, and it's of course the Trump administration have jumped all over this, saying, look, we've had these terrible instances of illegal immigrants driving trucks, killing people. We've therefore got to come down on this with a sledgehammer. But of course, many states like California have said, "Look, hang on, you can't just crack a nut with a sledgehammer," as they say. So they've tried to push back on this. But of course, the DOT, the Department of Transportation, have, for example, revoked $40 million in federal funding for failing, for example, to enforce English proficiency tests. In other words, if you don't comply with our draconian clampdown, regulatory speaking, then we will withhold money. And there's all sorts of examples of the federal government, or the state government, the central government withholding or threatening to withhold financing if you don't follow our guidelines. Now, California's Department of Motor Vehicles announced plans, for example, to revoke 17,000 CDLs issued to immigrants. Now, again, talking about jobs worths, the reason that these licenses were cancelled is because these licenses were set to expire after the time the migrants were legally allowed to remain in the US. So when their visas expire, but of course they get renewed in most cases, but unfortunately because their license, the end of their license goes beyond when their legal visa to stay in the US expires, they're cancelling the CDLs. They're saying, well, look, we can't guarantee that you're going to be in the US after your visa expires, so we're cancelling your CDL. In other words, these guys can't even work, despite the fact they are legally in the United States. So you can see how this cretinous legislative jobsworth situation, this bureaucratic loophole, is again exacerbating this problem. For example, and loads of examples this article comes up with, and one of them is 10 of one company's drivers quit last month. They have valid licenses and work papers, but they're afraid to go back on the road, worried that if they get stopped, they could get sent home, despite the fact that they are legal migrants. So again, I talk about law of unintended consequences. Now, policy changes regarding non-citizen commercial licenses and English language proficiency enforcement could remove, get this, more than 400,000 commercial drivers from the market over the next 3 years. That's according to one of the industry spokespeople. Now, if you remove 400,000 truck drivers from the US supply chain, what on earth do you think is going to happen? Shelves are going to lie empty, particularly for goods, perishable goods. You're going to go to your supermarket in the United States and suddenly realise, why are half these shelves empty? The reason is because you've lost 400,000 commercial truck drivers. You cannot remove nearly 500,000 of your drivers from your supply chain and expect your shelves to be full. So again, I talk about law of unintended consequences. Yes, there was a problem initially, but unfortunately this sledgehammer to crack this nut is going to have a huge impact, not just on, of course, the truck drivers within the Sikh industry, within the Sikh community. It's also going to impact everybody across the United States, whether you're buying a toy for your child for Christmas or whether you're trying to buy a banana or an avocado. When you suddenly can't find it on your shelf, you've got to understand why not. Now, of course, there is a genuine, legitimate argument going on saying, look, of course we do need to clamp down. We do need to regulate the trucking industry properly because it has to be regulated. Drivers are driving a weapon of mass destruction. The kinetic force in a truck is horrific if it's driven dangerously. In other words, people can easily die with trucks. There's absolutely no dispute about that, and there must be regulation. And even Sikh truck drivers or Sikh truck companies are totally backing enforcement of the legislation. Their drivers must be able to speak reasonable English. They must be able to read road signs. These are fundamental things which, of course, the Sikh community totally and utterly supports. Unfortunately, though, is that, as I talk about this sledgehammer to crack a nut, when you overdo it, all you're doing is you're now driving Sikh, legitimate, legal Sikh and experienced Sikh truck drivers out of the industry, and the consequences are massive. Not just the livelihoods of these Sikh truck drivers, but of course down that supply chain to the supermarket shelves and your shop shelves. There's a tongue twister. Your shop shelves, when they're empty, unfortunately, you have to understand why, James. So as I say, it's a bit of a mad situation developing there.
It is, Angus, and it's sad that, as you stated, it's a knee-jerk reaction to a problem that really needs a direct approach, but one that is focused. And this, instead of being focused, is just like throwing a fishing net and seeing what they can capture. If you talk to people, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm going to speculate that persons of color are being stopped a lot more than Caucasians when it comes to truck stops, truck inspections, scales, all of that. And that is, again, are we going back to a time where we were racially profiling people in order to try to catch them at something? And when you look at this, again, the Sikh community represents about 20% of the trucking industry, and that is North America wide. When you look at that number, the disproportionate number that are being stopped and harassed, again, shows a more of a propensity for the racial profiling when it comes to the drivers. When we look at those who are targeting them, of course, we now know that on social media and other media outlets, you are going to have the bots. So, of course, whether it's Raw, RSS, India, and others for more nefarious reasons, or just as nefarious, I should say, the racists and the nationalists and all that are going to perpetuate the stereotype and the problems and spread misinformation and disinformation about minority individuals or those with temporary work visas. They are going to make this even worse. And that's where people are being misled, because the problem is not as large as as the industry is. The number of people who have been injured or killed at the hands of Sikh truck drivers is much less than the other 80% of the industry, but the other 80% is not being reported on. They are not being vilified. They are not being the scapegoats for an industry that needs change. And in the final comment on that is that, of course, you can't get enough truck drivers when the manufacturers, the distributors, the government, everybody has forced the prices down for transportation costs. That means that trucking companies are making a lot less in terms of the margins. They can't afford to pay on comparison what they were, say, 20 years ago with inflation and everything else. So therefore, they are cutting corners, whether that is to bring in drivers that are less qualified. That's what you'll end up with down the road if this continues. When you look at people who are working and pushing the hours of service and the speed and all of that down the road, that's going to happen as well, because you are not looking after the drivers who were at one point heroes during a pandemic, that were getting the groceries to the grocery stores when everybody else was locked up in their homes, and now you're vilifying them, and that shows the double standard, I think, Angus.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right on that one, James. I couldn't agree more on that one. So, anyway, we need to move on now, because we're fast running out of time. We need to zip through our comments. Unfortunately, we have to zip through these very quickly. Punjab, thank you for this. This was after my interesting, very, I'd say, fascinating podcast with Dr. Grewal last week. We talked about the evidence is emerging from the Epstein files. The whole sex scandal was actually, ironically, a bit of a diversion from the real scandal under there. Is that he actually appeared to be a bit of a facilitator between the extreme right wing link between the Zionist extremists in Israel, the right-wing Hindutva extremists in India, and of course some of the MAGA extremists in the United States, saying he actually helped facilitate and link up these various organisations. Punjab obviously agreed with this, and not surprised, because as your point states, ultimately, all these people pointed to in that podcast, they are all extremists who see themselves as a superior race, and likewise, you say in the Jewish Talmud, they talk about goyim. Goyim meaning all the others are subhumans, and again, this is almost Hindutva ideology, saying that we are a superior race. But Killer then comes back with an interesting comment saying, look, it doesn't actually make sense, because if Bannon Bannon's basically a right-wing extremist, he's a racist in your view. He's trying to get immigration banned. So how on earth does that sort of sit in this whole thing? I think the answer to that, basically, to sum it up very quickly, again, we don't have much time to go into this now, is that it's nuance. There's a lot of nuances there. It's I think that the general picture is clear. There are individuals who might go slightly against the grain on that. And then the final point from Project Spider, ultimately says, why would Khalistan cooperate with these paedophiles right across these countries that are linked in this? Khalistan needs to be totally independent from these foreign governments, but work directly with the general population of these countries. Sadly, I'm afraid my point on that one is, in an ideal world, unfortunately, leaders have to deal with leaders. So the Khalistan leaders need to get leaders on side. Whether they like them or not, they need to get leaders in these other nations, James.
Absolutely. And let's not forget what we were talking about earlier about the opportunity for Khalistan to be a world leader and to lead by example. And this is another area of those equal and human rights that we were talking about that would be so well respected in Khalistan that they could set an example for the globe, not just the just the South Asian community.
Indeed. And independent and analyst. This is an interesting comment. Thank you for this. And actually it supports something I was suspicious about. Baba Khalsa is an imaginary, non-existent organisation. Of course, quite often India paints, and again, that video yesterday that I showed, they claimed that that gentleman who they interviewed was a former member of Baba Khalsa. What is Baba Khalsa? There's a bit on the internet about it, but ultimately, has it ever really existed? I don't know. But independent analysis says, no, it's a creation of the Indian state, basically. It's a bucket through which they can always label their so-called terrorists. Of course, any Khalistani campaigners they label as a terrorist. Well, they're all members of Baba Khalsa, aren't they? Well, what actually is Baba Khalsa? So as you say, it's never existed. It's a creation of the Indian state to easily allow them to label terrorists in the West and, of course, within India, James.
Absolutely. And I don't have enough time to go into it in details or what that is what Canadians look at Baba Khalsa as being. So maybe we'll talk about that in another show because I just don't have the time tonight. But I do understand the whole concept that they just want to have that bucket to throw everything in to see what sticks and to label people.
The phrase that springs to mind is, who is Kaiser Soze, for those of you who know that film I'm referring to? Who is Baba Khalsa? Big question. Stay Safe says, Avtar Singh Kandar's poisoning is very similar to Alexander Litvinenko, of course, the Russian dissident who was I think it was polonium, a radioactive substance. Yeah, absolutely. And TC totally agrees. Why aren't the media making more of this? Well, I suspect because the media is a tool of the establishment, James. We know the establishment is always protecting itself, and if it controls the media, it controls the narrative, James.
Absolutely, and we're getting less and less of people from a mixed source to control the media. Instead, it's getting very, very isolated and condensed in terms of who's controlling the media worldwide and the politicians and governments that are controlling them, or they're controlling the governments.
Indeed, and then we had of course we talked about there's that comment the other day about how many Khalistanis will actually return to Khalistan once Khalistan is established? Well, Amrit Saravar says, look, they all queued up in minus 10 degrees in that awful, dreadful conditions the other day to cast their vote. They're going to have no hesitation about heading home. Obviously, it's going to be an awful lot warmer. And Punjab likewise makes sort of the same sort of comment. That guy who made that comment can't be a Sikh or even a Punjabi, and you make the same point as I did at the time. Was, look, when Israel was established, it took years, even decades, for many Jews to decide we want to go back to Israel because they watched Israel grow and flourish and become a really successful state. So at that point, of course, people were attracted. Not just Jews, other people wanted to go and live there because it did look so nice. But as you rightly say, the conditions in the West, they're working 16 hours a day to build a life, constant struggles, etc. etc. So no, these aren't the comforts that keeping Sikhs in the Western world. It's the governance, the equality, human rights, etc. Is knowing that if your daughter's travelling at midnight, she's safe. It's a fair treatment. It's knowing you won't be picked up by the police on some trumped-up charge and thrown in a cell under the UAP or the NSA, etc. In other words, at the moment, they're too afraid to go back to Punjab. But once Khalistan's established, they know it'll be a free and safe society, James.
Absolutely. And I do think that in all reality, Angus, I think it is going to take a bit of a transition period for people to have that watch and see approach to returning to Khalistan. So it's not going to be the floodgates opening immediately. I think there's going to be some people that go back right away, but I think that more so people are going to be investing in their future by investing in Khalistan. And then they will, as things grow, develop, and prove themselves, then you'll see a lot of people, not only Sikhs, but a lot of people from around the world wanting to go.
An interesting statistic there at the end is that 65% of Indians leaving India are from Gujarat, which is, of course, Modi's own state. And, of course, that's interesting because, of course, Khalistan, the boundaries of Khalistan is hoped to include Gujarat state, take it all the way down to the coast. So if there's that many Gujaratis are unhappy with the conditions, they are likely themselves to start voting for Khalistan as well. So when people say, oh, it's just a peripheral movement to Sikhs, no, it's not. Clearly, there are enough people, presumably Hindus, who are fleeing Gujarat because they've had enough of what's going on even in Gujarat state. So anyway, final set of comments. Sat Bashan Singh says, thank you for this. Hi, truth teller twins indeed. And Magic Core, as she often does, pops in and says, hello Angus, well hello to you and hello to all our wonderful commenters. And the final sign off, James, as we always do, Magic Core starts us off with Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ka Fateh. Amrik Singh says, well done to both of us. Khalistan Zindabad, and the final Khalistan Zindabad goes to Bikarjit Singh. Apologies for my pronunciations there. But there you go, James. We always like to sign off on a very positive high note.
That we do, Angus, and thank you to our viewers for, again, just amazing comments.
Indeed, but there we must wrap things up as we've hit the hour mark. But thanks so much for watching. Do keep those comments coming. Thank you for all of you who have commented. Again, as always, some very interesting comments there and some really interesting, well thought out arguments. So thank you for those. And of course, we do invite anybody who has any criticism or wants to contradict our narrative. Come and try it on if you think you're hard enough. We do like to have a bit of banter with you guys. But in the meantime, anyway, we'll wrap things up for another day. Thanks so much for watching. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.